think about all of the different experiences that you might want to have in your life, all of the different things, kind of goals, dreams that you have, and then kind of map out what's the price point, high to low on those, what works in different ages of your life, and what works for different ages of your kids.
It appears companies are ramping up their return to the office requirements. According to a recent survey published in CNBC, 90% of companies plan to implement return to office policies by the end of 2024, with nearly 30% saying their company will threaten to fire employees who don't comply with in-office requirements. Needless to say, a lot of employees are not thrilled by this managerial push. So what are employees to do if they are feeling increased stress and corporate burnout? Well, one trend that seems to be catching on is the mini retirement. What is a mini retirement, you might be asking? Well, big questions like this are always better with really smart friends, so I thought I'd answer this one with my friend Jillian Johnsrud. After becoming financially independent at age 32, Jillian turned her personal and professional experience towards a creative life. She is a popular public speaker, teaches online classes, she's a coach, she's a podcaster, and a writer. Jillian has experienced dozens of mini retirements personally, and she coaches others on the life-changing benefits they have as well. When Jillian isn't supporting people with mini retirement advice, she's spending time with her husband and her kids and enjoying her favorite hot tea. Welcome back to the show, Jillian.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you again. We've had a few conversations on the podcast, but then also a lot in person. So I'm glad to connect with you again. Now, first things first, let's help people understand what this is. What is a mini retirement? Can you help us define a mini retirement?
Yeah, I personally define it by 3 attributes. It's stepping away from our primary career for a month or longer to focus on something that matters to us. And if you hit those 3, I feel like that's when you get most of the benefits.
Got it. So talk to us about what those major benefits are then. So, or at least the ones that you've found.
Yeah. So the thing I love about mini retirements is that it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. It's one thing that can have a lot of different functions and serve a lot of different needs. So for some people, like you mentioned, it helps reduce burnout. It's really tough to recover from burnout in the place that burned you out. And especially with returning back to work, you're taking people who are at their max. They're literally giving everything they have. Their plate is 100% full, and you're essentially just asking more from them. Saying, take this full plate and now add a commute and add in-office like stress and politics and don't, and they're hoping to do this by making their work productivity increase. So like on top of this, do more work with less time. And so burnout's a big one for a lot of people. Extended travel. There's so many things in our lives that don't fit into nights and weekends as much as we want them to. If you want to do a long through hike or, spend 3 months backpacking through Europe, it's not going to fit, Friday night to Monday morning.
Yeah, those European trips don't really work very well if you leave on Friday after work and then try to get home on Sunday night, right?
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the idea of that, let's talk about some ideas for mini retirement, because I think people get inspired by maybe other people's examples and what they've done. So maybe you could share some things that you've done or ones that you've heard about through your conversations.
Yeah, one of my favorites was when my kids were maybe like 2 to 11. We had a pop-up camper at the time, and we did 10 weeks through 10 national parks in our pop-up camper. And I don't know why. It was one of my favorites. Like the national parks out west are so beautiful. But my kids were also at that age where I knew if we don't do this now, this season of life is going to pass us by. This has an expiration date, and it's not going to hold for 20 years. When all my kids are in their 20s, I am not piling them into a pop-up camper for 10 weeks to do national parks. Like it's kind of a now or never. So I really appreciated that one. And I love travel. We travel now with our family every year, about half the year. But Last summer, I took 5 months and I landscaped my backyard. I built a food forest. I planted like 20 fruit trees and 50 berry bushes and a patio and all of these structures. And, every day I go out there and I, I, I literally like eat the fruits of my labor. And I really appreciate that one too, because it's something I'll enjoy for many years down the road.
I think that's a great example too, because it doesn't always have to be getting away, right? I mean, taking advantage
Mhm.
of the home you have, the land you have, to just experience it more than, like you said, nights and weekends. Because
Mhm.
we bought these homes or we bought this land so that we could enjoy it, but without the time to do it, it's really difficult, right?
Yeah, some people use them too just to get caught up on life, to declutter, to reorganize, to finally get rid of the huge stack of mail that is on their counter. Like, and there's so many things in life that they're important but not urgent. Finishing your wills, like finding new insurance. There's all these tasks that they're almost like tabs on the computer. You have 50 of them open. And in order to really like clear that mental clutter, like you just need some time to kind of get caught up.
I love that analogy because literally right now I think I have maybe seven tabs open. So it's a good metaphor for life. So I don't think there's anybody listening right now that's not nodding their head saying, yes, Jillian, I need that. I want that. Let's talk about the affording side of this thing, because I can just say personally, there's just been times where I went from one job to the next job, and I finished that one job on Friday and then I start the next one on Monday. Mostly because I'm like, well, I need to be able to afford my life. I need to be able to afford what I've got going on with my family. Talk to us about the afford side of things. How can people do this?
Yeah, I think that there's a mini retirement for every budget. So they don't have to be super expensive, and it might even be you might be able to negotiate a month off with your employer. And maybe you can string that together with some paid vacation, and so you're not going to lose out on a ton of salary. I had one employer give me a month paid off, and I did a road trip cross country with my best friend, and so it doesn't have to be super expensive, but it's having that intention and that focus. I once met a receptionist. She probably, based on local wages, she probably made $12 an hour, and she said she had just taken her first airplane ride. She had taken her first trip out of the state of Montana. And for her first trip, she took a month and went to Peru. And she's like, and I didn't go to the cities. I went to the deepest, darkest jungles of Peru. And I was like, oh my gosh, like Paddington Bear. Like, this is amazing. And I'm sure it wasn't that expensive of a trip. It's something that even earning $12 an hour, maybe she could have done some babysitting on the weekends or mowed some yards. And over the course of 6 months or 18 months, saved up enough for this experience. So sometimes it's just having that intention, because you might get a month in between jobs or 2 months in between jobs. And if you can just be a little bit intentional about it, most of us have that opportunity to take a short career break at some point.
That well, I love the intention of it. So I mean, even getting literal with it, it's putting money away
Mhm.
in an accessible
Yeah.
bank account so you can use it in the short term. Is that right?
Yeah. It's like having an emergency fund, but I think about it like an opportunity fund.
Mm.
When the opportunity arises, you want to have that money set aside. And I kind of call it your mini retirement go bag, kind of like NCIS. Like they have this little duffel bag with like a change of clothes and their passport and some cash. But in your mini retirement go bag, you need some cash, but you also need the intention. What are you going to do? What is it going to look like in this season of life? What are three options? Because especially if something bad happens, like if you get laid off, it can be really discouraging. And in those moments, might not be the most creative and inspirational to dream all of this up. But if you've kind of mapped it all out, you can kind of pick yourself up and be like, you know what? I have a plan. I have the cash. I have everything I need. Like, let's seize this opportunity.
So Jillian, you talk about being able to save up this money so that you can go and enjoy yourself. Now, you've done some things in your life, if I'm not mistaken, to create some continual income, even when you're not working. Can you talk about
Mhm.
some of those income streams that you've created and how that might make this process even easier?
Yeah, we ended up investing in rentals, which has been massively helpful, along with investing in our retirement accounts and brokerage accounts. But one thing that's really accessible to people, if you're thinking about this first one and maybe you want to do 6 months, if you own your house or even if you rent your house, you might be able to rent out your house while you travel.
Mm.
Last year we did an 8 month trip. We rented our house for about 2000 a month. So that was an extra $16,000 that helped pay for our trip. And at this point, our renting our house is about the same cost for us traveling. So whether we're traveling or home, our life costs about the same amount. And so it's one thing that is like it's a good accessible way to start if you're like, okay, oh my gosh, like buying rentals, doing all of this, like that's going to take a long time, where you could get your house ready to rent in maybe a month.
I love that. I love that. Well, there's somebody listening right now and they are liking what we're saying and they're thinking about, oh, okay, how can I make this happen? What's one first step that they could take to make this a possibility in their near future? Because they're excited about it. Maybe they listen to the top of the show and they're not excited about
Mhm.
being pulled back into the office for
Yeah.
extended period of time, and maybe they need that little break. They need a little buffer in between these two experiences. What's one step they could
Mhm.
take following this interview to pursue a mini retirement?
One thing I'd like to have people do is to think about all of the different experiences that you might want to have in your life, all of the different things, kind of goals, dreams that you have, and then kind of map out what's the price point, high to low on those, what works in different ages of your life, and what works for different ages of your kids to figure out what's the next thing that you should do. And depending where you are in your financial journey, I really encourage people start with the cheap stuff, start with the free stuff, start with when you're 80, you can do an around the world cruise. You'll have probably a lot more money when you're 80. You might be, instead of like 200,000, you might have 5 million. And an around the world cruise when you're 80 is still accessible, or when you're 70, where maybe hiking the Appalachian Trail, it's got an expiration date on it. It's cheap, so it's good to like put it towards the beginning of the list, but you also don't want to wait till you're 60 or 70, and you might be able to do it, but you might not. Our preferences and our bodies change. So I think about what's a good age for my kids. It's why we've kind of started with US road trips, because they might not be as interested when they get older in this. And it is something that fits really well now, where taking my kids to Europe, that might be more appropriate in a few years, taking them to Southeast Asia. I'm sure they'll love that when they're in their 20s, where they might not like camping with me in national parks when they're in their 20s for long stretches of time.
I love that. I think that's such a good point that I think the mindset might be, well, I'll do it when I'm retired. I'll do it when I'm in my 60s, when I get to a point. And I
Mhm.
think your point is, why not retire often? And I think that's fantastic. Jillian,
Yeah.
you've got a quiz on your website, which I love, that maybe will inspire some thoughts for people. Tell people where they can access that quiz and maybe where they can connect with you more.
Yeah, Retire Often is the website and the podcast, or Jillian Johnsrud, if you can figure out how to spell that, is where I'm at on social media.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to have those links in our video description for YouTube as well as our podcast description so they can connect with you and learn more how to retire often. Jillian, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.